This week, we welcome Merritt Maxim, Vice President and Research Director at Forrester, to discuss the Global Cybersecurity Market Forecast Report. In the Leadership and Communications segment, the problem with cybersecurity is not just hackers, it's how we measure risk. What's California's new AI law mean for CIOs and CISOs? The language of leadership, how to set firm boundaries without sounding like a jerk, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. AI gives attackers superpowers, and your employees are the soft target. Flip the script with Fable Security, the modern human risk platform. Fable's powerful risk engine connects the dots on human vulnerabilities, like password hygiene, phishing risk, and data sharing and generative AI, and deploys hyper-targeted snackable AI nudges and briefings, just in time, right where your people work. The result? Hard outcomes. 13x faster behavior change, 60 to 90% risk reduction. Make Fable part of your cybersecurity story. Visit securityweekly.com/Fable. Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 416, recorded October 6, 2025. I'm your host, Matt Alderman. Joining me for this interview segment is my lone co-host today, Mr. Jason Albuquerque. Welcome,
And
Jason.
you this week, buddy. Hey, listen, there were some upsets in the NFL this weekend. First of all, my Pats took out the Bills last night, so I can't be more happy about that. Looking promising. Broncos over the Eagles, big upset there. Texans over Ravens. So we saw some good upsets, but your Browns still lost. Sorry.
Yeah, they're going to keep losing too. But college football had some big upsets too.
Yeah, I know.
Penn State, 2 losses in a row. Texas
Yep.
now has 2 losses. Woo.
I know.
Yeah.
And it was a good football
We're going
weekend.
to State College this weekend, so picked a bad weekend to do that. So anyway.
Yeah, maybe. All right, one quick announcement, and then we'll get into it. Don't miss InfoSec World 2025, October 27th to 29th. It's like 3 weeks away, folks.
Mm-hmm.
At Disney's Coronado Springs Resort, cybersecurity pros, workshops, before and after, and endless networking. Save 25% with code ISW25-SW at securityweekly.com/ISW 2025. Merritt leads a team of analysts who provide research and advisory services that address the needs of security and risk professionals. His team focuses on identity and access management, endpoint security, threat intelligence, and vulnerability management strategies and technologies. Previously, Merritt was a principal analyst on the security and risk team, focusing on identity and access management best practices and technologies, as well as physical security and the Internet of Things security. Merritt, welcome back to Business Security Weekly.
Thank you, Matt and Jason, for having me again. It's good to be here.
Yeah, we love the Forrester analysts. I had Jess on a few weeks ago. You guys publish great reports. You guys come on the show often to share the results of that report, which I think is awesome because it gives our listeners the ability to get some of that data. So this is the Global Cybersecurity Market Report from 24 to 29. So you just do these in 5-year spans, right?
Correct. And this is the first time we've done a forecast like this. So, but the intention would be to update this on an annual basis.
Got it. And so when I dig into the report, like I want to get into some of these findings, right? I think the headline here is 14.4% CAGR, right? So compounded annual growth rate, 14.4% from 24 to 29, and will hit 302.5 billion in the year 2029. So, that's a big number there, Merritt.
It is. And it's just like, as I said, because our first forecast, I think Forrester may be viewed as not traditionally being a quantitative oriented firm, that's usually done by other vendors in the market. But as a I have a kind of quantitative nature to my background, and reality is we actually have a lot of collective knowledge within the team, and so we finally decided that we actually should try to put one together. So I led the effort, but I relied on the individual subject matter experts in each of the respective areas to actually build this forecast out. The intention, as I said, is to update this annually. And I would also say, having done forecasts before, we try to take a conservative, I think, realistic view. 25% annual growth rates in markets this size just aren't sustainable. You might have a year or two we have that growth, but the math just makes it very hard. It means by the fifth year, like the amount of money that has to be added to make that growth rate just isn't sustainable. So 14% may seem on the low side, but I think it's a realistic number, and we're confident in the analysis that produced that final number. And obviously would be perfectly fine if the number ended up. I'd rather be wrong, underestimating than overestimating, and there's still that potential that the final number could actually be a little bit higher in 2029.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen these forecast reports before, right, from other firms, right? And you're right. You see these big growth rates, and then you're like, wait a minute. I don't think a lot of clients are seeing their budgets increase that much. So how do you get to those bigger numbers, right, Jason?
Yeah,
Correct.
no, true. I mean, again, we're seeing flattened budgets, right? And also, I sit back and I say, do we have a way to connect the spend to risk mitigation, right? I know we're forecasting a decent expenditure over the next 5 years, but do we have a way to tie it to risk mitigation? Because I know so many organizations spend by the blinky lights, but at the end of the day, they're not bringing down their risk.
Yeah, and I think like if you look in the forecast, for instance, endpoint security, which is actually one of the larger segments, actually, I believe it has our slowest growth rate, and that's reflective of the fact that most companies have deployed endpoint security, and the only incremental spend there is maybe as they add more employees or they make some changes. But the point is, like, attack vectors are changing, and you can't just rely purely on the endpoint to keep you secure. And so over time, it's still a very large market, with a lot of established players in it, but the growth rate's not as high there, just for the simple reason that stuff's kind of already been deployed, and companies are using endpoint solutions, but that doesn't necessarily reduce the risk in the level because of the way that attacks are changing over time.
Yeah. So when I look at the list, right, I go to my three favorite core areas: app, user, data, right? All three on this list, all three with pretty decent sized growth rates in them still, right? I mean, I've been saying this for a decade now. As we move to the cloud and we continue to shift applications into that environment, applications, identity and access and data are the things you can control as an organization. There's certain things you may or may not control, like the network or the endpoint. And so I see some of those themes here as well, Merritt. But when I look at, I mean, network security is still a pretty good size chunk and growth. I'm curious, like, what's in that bucket? Different than historically, where I ran a bunch of my own infrastructure. I'm not doing that as much, am I?
Correct. And I would say this was actually kind of an interesting kind of exercise as part of building a forecast, is that we actually did have some kind of what I would kind of call sanity checks with some CISOs that are clients of ours. And basically, really, and I wasn't asking for options, I was just saying, like, across these major domains, how do you allocate budget? And what you see is that everything kind of gets spread pretty evenly, for a simple matter that you can't ignore app security and put all your money on endpoint, or you can't ignore network and put it all on identity. Network, and if you go back, 4 or 5 years ago, network was absolutely probably the bigger, maybe up to 20% of the security budget. That's kind of coming down. It's still a big segment, but I think what those conversations with CISOs told us is that, to Jason's point about risk, is that companies' budgets are thin, and they have to spread them across an even wider variety of products and services in order to truly protect the enterprise. Whereas, 15 years ago, it may have just been, firewalls and things like that may have been sufficient. That no longer works.
Now, Merritt, did you guys see any trends when you're starting to do the research, whether it's industry specific acceleration in spend or regional or something to that effect? Were there any trends in certain markets that you saw, or regions?
Yeah, it's funny you asked that because that was like the first follow-on question after the forecast published is like, what's the, what is this in Latin America or what is this? And we tried to stick at a global level for this, and also stick at a vertical, not do a vertical level, based on client input. I think that is something when we do this next year, we will start to take a big look at. And North America, or specifically, is still the largest market for cybersecurity spend at an absolute number, but it's growing at a lower rate. Definitely APAC, Latin America is showing a higher growth rate off of a smaller base, and EMEA is right there as well. So, and same within verticals, kind of the same things apply. It's obviously financial services drives a lot of that. But yeah, we have some kind of other methodologies that we could apply to try to come up with that distribution. We didn't do this time, but I think we'd like to do it more. And again, it's something that clients have been asking about, kind of in response to that.
I mean, one thing you guys did do is you showed that there's a software dominance in spend, right? So that's a place where things are focused now. How do you see that as far as pushing toward? We talk about this all the time, the ecosystem, right? Are you seeing folks move toward that software dominance as far as like platform consolidation, vendor consolidation, moving more toward that consolidated ecosystem?
Yes.
Or are you seeing still that best of breed investment that's going out there?
That argument is still out there, best of breed versus the suite. But I think obviously the platform players have some advantages, and one of the things that you've seen kind of in response to that is the introduction of like flexible pricing, as essentially you commit to paying a certain amount, but then you can essentially use whatever products we have available. So we're not forcing you to only use this module. I know CrowdStrike did it. I believe Trend Micro and introduced similar, and I've heard some other vendors are doing something. I think that's obviously a way to help deepen the relationship with the customer and give the customer ultimately flexibility over how they choose. It actually helps the budgeting process better because they can budget out the next 3 years what their spend is, and then they can figure out, okay, we want to spend it on this or that, and you can mix and match. And I think we'll see more of that, and I think that will certainly help the platform vendors at the expense of the point vendors, and there will continue to be consolidation in the marketplace. I think they said there are up to 5,000 security firms globally. They're not all going to make it, so the consolidation will continue to be a factor in all of this.
Yeah, so there's two points in here that I want to get into, and they're a little connected, right? It looks like the growth of security services starts to slow down in the next 5-year period, right? Which was a little surprising to me, maybe because we keep hearing this thing, we don't have enough skills, we don't have the right people, we still have the shortage from a skill set perspective. At the same time, we're also seeing some really interesting large platform players pick up security service capabilities to embed, like Zscaler's acquisition last quarter, to bring services to bear in part of this market. Talk through those dynamics a little bit, because they're interesting, right? I would have expected security service spending maybe to go up a little bit, and we're seeing platform players bring more service capabilities to market, but I didn't necessarily see that in the data.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think kind of what our point of view on that was. And first, when we talk security services, we excluded traditional outsourcing and kind of deployment services from our services forecast. So we're really focusing on things like MDR, other kind of more traditional kind of managed services. So it's important to kind of understand that's how we kind of define services. And services is still like a very big segment here, and not necessarily growing as fast as software. So I think services will play a role, but I think a couple of things are at play. I think services are getting more efficient in terms of what their capabilities are and what their cost is. And I think kind of you said, like Zscaler, vendors are starting to potentially build some more of those capabilities natively in the product, which reduces some of the limitations of services. And we all know the ongoing kind of macro issue about staffing and availability of resources being a function like that issue affects security services for them probably more than it does traditional enterprises. So I think that may also play a role on that in terms of kind of how that services market's going to play out over the longer term.
So, Merritt, I'm not sure if you took a look at the why. So the question is, why, number one, the exclude, right, of outsourcing and let's call it professional services consulting, and then secondarily, if you know what that number would have been, how would that have affected the mix?
Yeah, that's a
That
good
blend?
question. We didn't include it for a couple things. One, that's kind of for one, that's a lot harder to estimate because that's primarily the domain of the systems integrators that do quite a lot of high quality work there. But frankly, we didn't actually have a great way of kind of deriving that number. That you can take some multiple of software spend, but it's challenging. And I think the traditional outsourcing, we're not saying it's not an important capability, but again, the focus here was really on the kind of capabilities that CISOs are, really focused on. And traditional outsourcing is something that, kind of keeps the lights on. They're kind of, locked into that, and they don't necessarily view that perhaps as significantly as they do the product area. So that was kind of a choice we made to simplify the survey. Certainly, outsourcing employment services is a big number. I know just from my own background in identity access management that deployment services for identity access management is a very large business, that all of the major SIs have very robust and strategic offerings in that space because there is so much work involved with deploying identity access management. But as I said, we just hadn't. I think we're challenged to kind of come up with a good description for that, and I think as we look at this in the future, that may be a number we would add in there, but it certainly would add to the cyber spending number considerably, although it would be at a lower growth rate because the spending is going more towards software and more kind of product specific initiatives.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, because I can imagine the large players, right? They do a lot of infrastructure projects. How do you break out the security specific
Yes,
stuff from the
exactly.
non-security specific stuff,
Yeah.
right? So I kind of get that. Not many firms probably break it down that way to actually measure it. I'm not surprised by the growth rate of cloud security and cloud security being the biggest. But here's my question, and if you're seeing any trends here, right? The cloud movement continues, right? Accelerated through COVID. However, Jason and you and I have talked about this a little bit. Like, are we starting to see the pendulum swing the other way? Especially when it comes to AI, and I do want to get into the AI numbers here in a little bit, Merritt. But as people start deploying AI and you start seeing the costs of running AI, and I've seen these numbers because I'm actually building stuff with it, we're starting to see this potential trend of moving some of those services back into a data center environment, which could potentially slow down some cloud adoption just because of the cost associated from an AI perspective. Are you guys seeing any of that? Or is there any case out there that we might see a shift back into data centers because of AI?
Yeah, I think there's not necessarily a shift. I think there's always been a segment of the market that is just cloud averse or risk averse to the cloud, and for whatever reason, they've never really deployed much in the cloud. I talked with a client like this a week ago, multinational that has done very little in the cloud other than some very basic things like expense management and things like that. And again, it's purely a risk function. And so I think those companies are obviously well positioned that if they want to, build out the AI infrastructure using a data center, they can do that. That's still a small, very small percentage of the market, but those companies do exist out there, and I think they will continue to exist. And I think you're right. The continued concerns about cloud breaches, and a lot of those are from like misconfigurations or not having visibility in the environment. That I think could spur more companies to try to bring some of that more back on-prem. I think the operative word when we really talk about architecture is hybrid. Like, companies are never going to be 100% fully in the cloud. They're always going to maintain some stuff on-prem, and that could impact spending, but I think regardless of kind of what the hybrid environment looks like, the reality is that cloud will continue to be a threat vector, and that's why companies are going to be spending to protect what they do deploy in the cloud, and that's why cloud came in as the highest growth rate in our forecast.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Like Matt had said, we're starting to see clients hopefully swing back to a little bit of a balance, right, and start talking about edge computing, because they have a lot of workloads up in the cloud, and they're starting to see those Azure, AWS, GCP bills, and then they're saying, wow, we need to do data analytics. We need to, ingest more data. Now we want to implement AI within our organization, internal AI engines and agents, and they just see that cost skyrocketing. So they're starting to bring things back to the edge for some of those workloads. Number one, performance, security, and then cost, right? So those are really the three aspects that I'm starting to see conversations around to bring workloads back to the edge.
Yeah, I've even seen like, I mean, one of the things, for instance, like change control, like in the cloud environment, upgrades essentially just appear and you have to kind of manage them. And I've heard some customers that say like, I'm not ready to upgrade right now. I want to postpone that upgrade or I want to wait on it. And then the on-prem world, like that model works because you can essentially defer the upgrade and do it when you want. The cloud, because of the kind of velocity with which they issue releases, makes that challenging. And in large organizations that can actually be a factor to say like, we need the cloud is actually moving faster than our organization can actually keep up with. And we therefore need to kind of rethink about, what we are in fact going to deploy the cloud versus keeping on-prem.
Yeah, one of the questions I have is, AI obviously has been the buzzword for a while, but conversations within businesses are starting to get more real, right? We're starting to have really relevant use cases for AI. Security vendors are bringing AI into their product lines. And I look at it and you're looking at what, 21.2% growth in the next 5 years for AI security impact, the spending. What does that do for vendor landscape? Are you going to start seeing the consolidation of vendors like we talked about earlier with the ecosystem approach? Or does that make it more competitive for smaller vendors?
Yeah, I think
what's that vendor landscape going to look like?
Yeah, I think we're already starting to see some of that. Palo Alto bought Protect AI. Can't remember whether Sneak brought something else. So some of that's already happening. Some of the earlier companies that raised kind of large Series A's, those are starting to get acquired by the platform vendors. So I think that's going to continue. I track there's about 50 or so cybersecurity AI companies, startups that have raised collectively about $1 billion that we kind of keep an eye on. And a couple of those have already been acquired. I certainly think there'll be some consolidation. There will also be a room for pure plays. But I think the intention to embed AI as a feature in the platforms as opposed to requiring you to go to another party to get that, I think that's very much at play here. And I think you'll see more of that. Now, the problem is there's not enough big players to go around and buy all these companies. So some will likely, die a slow death, or they'll get acquired maybe by a non-security company. But certainly funding is going to continue to pour into that. But ultimately, there will be some consolidation among the players in that space.
I'm going to double click into this one a little bit. Some of these companies could actually disrupt certain companies. Because I've seen the power of what some of this stuff can do. How disruptive can it be? Maybe not to the big platform players, right? Palo and CrowdStrike and these guys are big. They got a lot of money to invest, but AI startups could disrupt certain parts of the security market. There could be some vendors that just completely get eliminated through some of these. Do you see that as well? Like, I'll give you an example.
That potential. I think at the margin, perhaps say companies that maybe vendors that have a stronger, say, installed base that's on-prem and therefore not perhaps as cloud-centric, and therefore AI may be a little bit harder to kind of deploy in those environments. So for certain capabilities, I think the market will kind of dictate those vendors that try to kind of reposition around that will do have the ability to take spend. And I think the point is if they make it painful enough for certain vendors, then that's when the vendor will say, okay, we should just buy these guys because we're missing out on these capabilities. And right, I think the thing with AI, we always have that build versus buy kind of discussion. Security, I think given the kind of talent and expertise needed to really do AI well, that's going to, I think, be a driving factor in buying companies. It's really as less about the functionality as more as buying the talent to bring in to really accelerate the innovation and product development when you're part of a larger, more well-capitalized parent company.
Yeah. In my second part of this question is, do we see a new category of security products evolve? I've seen this thing around AI governance. We're going to cover an AI governance article. AI governance to me is not the end all be all solution space here. I think we will see enhancements and improvements in real AI security around modeling and monitoring these models, do we see a whole new category of potential products start to break into this list of top security spends?
I think it's a possibility. As I going back to that list of startups, like we try to categorize them, and certainly the kind of AI governance and AI security is a category that's of a lot of interest. And I think we know Cisco's are generally risk averse and sometimes slightly paranoid. And so I think for them to kind of check the box and say, I'm willing to deploy this, understanding the model, the inputs, how the data is used, where it's stored is going to be a really critical first step. And so tools that can help enable that are going to play, I think, a very important role in that. So I'm not sure how large that category will be, but I do think there's a need in that market to do that type of and to give you the confidence that you can deploy the model and you're not going to be leaking sensitive data or causing other things that are going to cause kind of problems down the road.
Yeah, because there's a lot of adjacencies, right? If I'm running the models in the cloud, I got cloud security requirements. Obviously, data plays huge here, making sure, I'm only sending the right data. So there's some overlaps, but I was just curious if we see the emergence of kind of a pure play AI governance security space.
Yeah, certainly if you look at where venture capital, the answer to that is yes, in terms of where they've been putting money, whether that's translating to actual deployments and hard revenue, that may take a little while longer, but I certainly think there's a handful of companies that are really trying to go at that space. The other kind of big area that we've seen interesting is deepfake detection. If you look at like the RSA Innovation Sandbox, the last 2 years, I think both the winners or the finalists there's a bunch of kind of deepfake oriented detection companies, and that is a real concern, and that's kind of thing that actually gets the executives and senior management interested because they themselves could be impersonated, and that can create a lot of issues. So that's more of a kind of threat mitigation play, but we see quite a bit of investment going into companies that do that as well.
So Merritt, for our listeners, right? I mean, we focus a lot on leadership and executive strategy here on Business Security Weekly. And so much of these spending drivers, the precursor to that is budgeting, right? So helping our executives here who are listening, what's really been the driver for a lot of the spend that you're seeing going to happen? Is it regulation? Is it executive buy-in where the executive team and the board of directors are saying, you want to know what? The cybersecurity thing is actually a thing. It's a business enabler, and they're getting support from the rest of the leadership team. What would you say to cybersecurity leaders as far as investment strategy, budget alignment, conversations they can be having, and what the drivers are for all this spend?
Yeah, I think there's probably three kind of dominant kind of factors driving spending. One would be the compliance angle. So depending on what industry you're in, and we see now there's a new law in California on AI, we had new emerging regulations. So that certainly plays a role. And I'd say when we talk about compliance, it's not necessarily just compliance. It can also be legal challenges, whether it's a class action suit or something else that causes some impact to one company. That's counting that also can have an impact. So there's a compliance angle. There's the category of companies that have been breached, and therefore they are getting much more serious about, and they have perhaps a more executive level mandate to do something about it. That's not necessarily a situation that you want to be in, but there are companies who follow that. And then the third would be kind of your point, the ones that see security as a business enabler. They may be perhaps say a B2C firm, and they see this kind of security and trust as being a key differentiator for how they build their services to their clients. And so those are probably, I'd say, the three dominant drivers on security spending. Depending which one you're in, the areas that you're going to invest in are probably going to vary to some extent. But I think if we look at it, those are probably the most common kind of categories of the things that drive spend.
The lessons, right?
Yes.
The proactive, the reactive, and I've already been owned because I don't have a choice, right?
Yeah.
I have to do it now.
Yeah. Yep. That's a good summary. Very good.
Yeah. Right. And we're going to cover two of the three of those in the articles in the next segment. So stay tuned, right? Merritt, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Great. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed the discussion.
Always a pleasure. Ransomware. Supply chain attacks, 0 days. Cyber threats don't wait, and neither should your business. With ThreatLocker, you're not just reacting to threats, you're stopping them before they start. Our Zero Trust endpoint protection locks down your environment with pinpoint control over what's allowed to run and what's not. No guesswork, no blind spots. Just proactive, built-for-now security that keeps your business moving. Want to see how a true default deny strategy works? Head over to securityweekly.com/threat locker and take the first step towards shutting the door on threats before they even knock. All right, so let's get into this week's articles. As I said, there's a couple that we just talked about a little bit. How cybersecurity impacts customer loyalty. So Merritt just said something about B2C customers, right? A little bit. Right. And how cybersecurity, being proactive, like understanding how it could impact customer loyalty. This is one of those areas that we kind of just touched on a little bit from a budget spend perspective, because there's a reputational component here, right? If you're looking for customer loyalty and you guys and your company gets breached, there could be an erosion of trust and therefore an erosion of business, right?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I read the article and my gut basically says, is this a depends conversation? It depends on the type of company you are. Like if you remember back in the day, Target, they're doing really well. I know they took a little bit of a hit up front when they had their breach, but at the end of the day, they're still a very viable company and they're making money. And I don't know, right? Are these conversations it really depends where in the world you're operating and who your customers are? If you're going right to the consumer and you're one of these too big to fails, like a Target, a Walmart, a Verizon, and you're a consumer type company, I don't know, does it impact loyalty? I still shop at Target.
I don't shop, but my wife does all the shopping. So.
But you know what I'm getting at, though. Where if you look at other types of industries where you're doing vendor risk assessments against your partners, that could matter and those type of things. But does it really matter where you play in the business world for this to be a thing?
Yeah, I guess it depends, right? If you're B2B, it definitely fits into play.
Right.
For sure, right? Because
absolutely 100%.
Retention rates are important. Maybe in a B2C context, maybe it's not.
Yeah. And that's why I sat back and I read the article and I'm like, is there a such thing as kind of the too big to fail when it comes to this? And I think of the Walmarts and the Targets and
Amazon,
Verizon's, mobiles and all of that.
Yeah.
T-Mobile. Yeah. T-Mobile, I know T-Mobile had their incident.
They've had two.
Yeah, right. But do you think T-Mobile's going away? No, of course they took a hit. I get it. They took a hit. It definitely cost them money. But when they sit back and they look at it, are they going to look at this as you want to know what? I'm going to consider this like a self-insured payout, whatever, and I'm just going to keep moving on and I'm going to keep making money.
Yeah. Baby.
Well, I don't know. It just I have the angel and the devil on my shoulder playing both sides of this. And it was a struggle. Honestly, it was a struggle for me where I get it from like a B2B vendor risk perspective. But then I look at some of these companies and I say, they probably don't even care right now.
Maybe. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. So
if you're still shopping there.
That was my little take on that when I read the article.
Got it. All right. So let's go to the next article then. The problem with cybersecurity is not just hackers, it's how we measure risk. Agree 100%. Look, Syerson's been on the show. He wrote the book with Hubbard on how to measure anything cybersecurity risk. Here's what I thought was really interesting in this article. So we all know the show. We all know the movie Moneyball, right? The Oakland A's and how they, filled their gaps looking at how much they had to spend and how do they get the output. And Richard does a really interesting thing here. It says, so that's what CISOs need to do, right? Like, how do we win with the budget we've got? Right.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about this so much on the show where we know that organizations don't have hundreds of millions of dollars to spend on cybersecurity. So focus on what's most important within your organization. Mitigate the highest risks that you have. Know what you have first, right? Go in there, know what you have, classify your risks, and then start mitigating the highest risk to your organization. And then eventually you start whittling down the risk. I loved this article. I love the article because it's what we've been talking about for 5-6 years now on this show about we get it. It's not just throwing money at a problem. It's figuring out what you have to spend, and focus on what your business stands to lose. Protect what your business stands to lose and focus on that.
And you asked Merritt this a little bit on the previous segment on how to justify some of the spend, right? Because that's really what this article is talking about is you've got a budget, it's X. How do you allocate that budget across all those different areas we just talked about, cloud security and endpoint and all this other stuff? And what's that right mix? The right mix depends on this is what am I trying to protect? Where are my biggest risks? If something happens that it's an extinction event, like how do I mitigate that? And that's where I start to allocate dollars, right? Because you're not going to allocate maybe across all those buckets because you don't have the budget to do it.
Right. In the article, he calls it out, right? Because he was talking about, somewhere in the article, he was talking about speaking to board members, and board members were asking about, hey, what metrics do we have to look at? And he says, it's super risky if you don't tie those to business outcomes. And that's the key for CISOs in the business, is to start looking at the business's strategic goals, the outcomes that the business is starting to achieve, the one that they want to achieve, and then starting to align those with risk mitigation strategies and having those conversations, right? And having that investment. And when you can tie risk to business outcomes, you're going to get the budget, or you're going to start getting the investment into the budget, because now you're speaking the language of the business, like we say all the time.
Yep. Or you're in California and now you're bound to the new California AI law.
Right. Which, at the end of the day, is an outcome, right? Because the board may say, we can't get caught. We need to make sure we're adhering to this. So guess what? Invest some dollars, right? That could be part of the conversation with the board.
Yeah. So I think they just signed it last Monday. Yeah. This is now law, right? So folks who don't know our market very well or haven't been tracking this for a while, we're going to end up with 50 AI laws.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. Which just like we have 50 breach laws, we're going to end up with 50.
We've talked about it on the show how unwieldy that is for CISOs, right?
Yeah.
So now they're going to have to manage 50 privacy laws across 50 states, 50 AI laws across 50 states, and then whatever international laws that are regulations that they have to adhere to if they're an international company and have presence in other companies or clients in other companies. It's just unwieldy, right? The one thing that I think they did right here, though, is they put the caveat in here that says if there is a federal regulation that meets the same type of criteria and diligence that this does, it's going to align to the federal law, right? Which I think is great, which I think is absolutely awesome to say. We realize that there may be a federal regulation at some point and that we would have to adhere to that and step away a little bit from having just a California side. So I think that's a smart, proactive thing to do. Right. Hopefully other states do the same.
Yep. I pulled up the bill because I wanted to see what was in it, Jason, right? So I actually have it in front of me because what does this mean? Like, all right, now there's this law in place. What do I have to do? So if you're a large frontier developer, which means you hit a certain dollar threshold, and I'm not going to read all the definitions.
It's all revenue based, right?
The large frontier developers, there's a revenue threshold for this, right? They shall write, implement, comply with, and clearly conspicuously publish on its internet website a frontier AI framework that applies to large frontier models, describes how the model's approaches work, and it lists out all this stuff, right?
Yep.
So there's a set of requirements here for the models. Okay, check. And so you can go through this checklist. There's like 10, 11, something like that. Then it says, the Office of Emergency Services shall establish a mechanism be used by the frontier developer or member of the public to report a critical safety incident. Right. So there's going to be incident tracking for this. So if your AI
that's
model,
like a whistleblower kind of thing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there will be a place to report that in here. And then the next section is about reporting. So it looks like this goes into effect January 1st, 2027, because that's when you have to kind of assess to this and keep annual compliance with this going forward. And then there was one other section, just about the reporting documentation.
So Matt, what's the stick in all this? What's the penalty? What happens if you don't comply?
I haven't seen it yet.
No, okay, because the article talked about like $1 million per violation. I just don't know if
it is.
Codified.
No, it's true. Yeah, it is codified. Yeah, it is.
Okay,
yeah.
It's codified? Okay.
Yep. 22757.15. A developer that fails to publish or transmit a compliance document required to be published or transmitted under this chapter. There is a fine that does not exceed $1 million per violation. That is codified.
Doesn't exceed. Okay.
Yep.
Is there a definition of what a violation means?
Yeah.
It's not having the documents up there, or is it like a quality thing?
Yeah, I think you've got to have you've got to have this document that starts January 1st, 2027, and annually thereafter. The Department of Technology shall assess recent evidence and developments to your model. So there's going to be some sort of like report or certification process out of this, I think, is what's going to happen. And if you're not in compliance or something like that, then you can be fined up to
the other question I had, since you read the bill, and it's popping in my head now, what type of company is in scope? Is it headquartered in California, doing business in California, or having clients in California?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a bunch of I'm trying to. I think it's for any model developed in California.
Okay.
I think. Affiliate artificial model. They talk about catastrophic risk. That's the any means foreseeable and material risk that it sets a threshold at $1 billion in damages. There's some really interesting definitions in here. I was trying to remember what the revenue cutoff was. It's a large frontier developer is over 500 million in gross revenues.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty big stick.
Yeah,
but
it'd be interesting to see if it's, do you have your headquarters there? Do you just have like an office in California? Is it because your clients are in California? I don't know. Like, it'd be interesting to see who's in scope.
Yeah, I think it's the company based California, but I'll have to find it. The reason this bill, he vetoed the first bill because it didn't account for frontier developers under the 500 million threshold. And there's requirements in here for a frontier developer and a large frontier developer. There's more requirements, and I think more of the certification falls onto the large frontier developers, but they didn't want to exclude others that are building models under that threshold.
Right. Yeah, and I think the moral of the story here is more to come, because we're going to see other states follow.
Yeah, there's already legislation in other states going through the state houses. So they're the first.
What a manage. Here we go.
We will have 50. Which ties into how CISOs can drive effective AI governance. Then my next article.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, the great part about this article is it talks about the need, like we talk about all the time, is finding the balance, right? You have to find the balance between allowing the business to move forward and not being a roadblock, but at the same time mitigating risk, right? Because if you're too slow, you're either gonna get the board in the executive suite really, really mad because you're a roadblock and you're looked at as the Department of No, or you're gonna get way far ahead of your skis and have a ton of risk within the organization. So we have to find that balance, and that's really what the job of the CISO is to do, is to be that cybersecurity risk-focused executive who can enable the business, reduce the risk, and make sure you're not dragging your feet as a company, but make sure you're not putting the company at risk that they shouldn't be in, right? So it's a science, no doubt about it, right? We're kind of in that middle, and it's hard. It's hard to win on either side because you're either too slow or something happens. It's your fault. So it's a tough position to be in.
It is. In what I liked in this article, Sands actually identifies some of the different control categories to address from an AI perspective. And I think it was last week we talked a little bit about this. You weren't on last week. And the one I see that's the real big challenge is, how do you monitor these systems in real time? How do you monitor what, based on the inputs, what the outputs are doing? How do you monitor that and look for change? Like, that's an evolving area. And that's why I asked Merritt these questions on the previous segment around this, is I could see very specific AI security categories growing, monitoring being one of them. Yeah.
I mean, I look at just access as well, right? Access to the models, access to the APIs, forcing that least privilege zero trust model on this because, again, the business is going to be pushing to move fast.
Yes.
Have to slow things down and talk about identity and access management, all this. It slows things down.
Yep. Sure does. It's got access controls, data controls.
Yep.
Obviously your infrastructure stuff all in here, which you would expect, but it's really the monitoring piece where I think we'll see the most innovation needed to really model these systems in real time. I've even had
the blind spot. That's the blind spot.
It is. Well, I've actually been talking to my VP of engineering about this. I'm like, in our QA test, how can we validate that the prompt's not doing something malicious? So we're going to write, we write malicious prompts to see if they do it. So like, go delete a user.
Yeah.
Will it do it? Won't it do it? Like that. So you're going to create these like tests to actually test the prompts to make sure they're not going to allow you to do something malicious. Right. So,
yeah. And then at the end of the day, how do you get proactive, right? How do you get that monitoring in front of security teams so they can mitigate it right out of the gate? Get that visibility.
Yeah. I think we're going to get a whole bunch of new set of logs coming our way someday soon. If we don't already see them. Yeah. Yeah. All right. A couple leadership articles to finish up this week. The Art of the Executive Exit. This one focused on the CEO, but I think this could be for any executive leadership transition.
100%. You know, and in the article right out of the gate says it all. Let's replace CEO with executives. Executives' first 100 days are always studied, always looked at. There are best practices and plans. Name your executive. The CEO's first 100 days, the COO's first, the CISO's first 100 days. There are all of that. CIO's first 100 days. What we never look at is the last days.
The last 100 days.
Those last days that they're there in the seat and what that transition looks like. Never look at that. So I loved this article. I loved it. It talked about, you know, the good transitions, how bad transitions look. And they talked about, you know, some best practices when it comes to transitions. And one of the ones I loved is they actually call it out, and I'll put it in my own words. Take the ego out of leaving the role. Like pull the ego out and say, you want to know what? Over the course of my next however many days I have left, I'm going to make sure this is a smooth transition. Make sure that I hand over the reins to this and that the business doesn't even know the difference and it keeps operating, because it can be catastrophic for an organization, whether it's an entire company or an entire department or an entire business unit. It can be absolutely catastrophic for so many reasons. Too much disruption. There could be alliances and political issues that go on. It could be morale issues with employees. Like you could have an outgoing executive that just wants to stick it to the company and sabotages things, right? So that period is critical. It's so important. I love that you put this article in here.
Yeah, and it also gives you some really good tips for the board on how to move the business forward after this, right? Sure. And this could be used by the CEO for an executive under the CEO, but it really talks through how does leadership, the rest of the leadership, make this kind of positive at the end of the day, right? Like through these transitions. So.
And one of the things we talk about a lot, the carrot and the stick, right? Reinforce with incentives. If this is a smooth transition and everything goes well, here's what you get walking out the door.
Right.
You're going to want this. So guess what? Here's what you get. You get an incentive, whether it's a comp bonus or whatever, you get an incentive by making it a smooth transition. And the other note that I took was some folks may feel like the transition of power, let's call it, is orchestrated. But that's not a bad thing. It may feel fabricated, but fabricated doesn't mean disingenuous. It just means it's planned, it's designed, right? And it's played out like a playbook.
Right.
For the betterment of the organization and the people working for the organization.
Yeah, because you don't want to affect the overall, the rest of the environment, the rest of the company, any objectives you're trying to accomplish. Like you don't want this to be disruptive.
That's right.
Now, sometimes it is, but you don't want it necessarily.
Or try to make it the least disruptive as you possibly can. Right? That's the key. That's your job as an executive with a brand, because you're still leaving the company with a brand. You want to maintain that brand.
Right.
At the end of it.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, just because it's fabricated and structured and planned out like a playbook doesn't mean it's disingenuous. It just means you're really thinking things through and planning it out.
Yep. All right, last article. Leadership and a little bit of communication, the language of leadership, how to set firm boundaries without sounding like a jerk. I know a few people that could read this article and learn
absolutely.
from it.
Yeah, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. It's so important. You know, we say it a lot. Words matter. Words matter.
Yeah.
And setting expectations with folks matters as well. So, you know, well, there was, I don't know if it was a Jim Carrey movie, and he looks and he's trying to get a date with a woman, and she says something very vague and beating around the bush, and he looks at her and goes, "So you're saying I got a chance?" Right?
Right.
And at the end of the day, you don't want to leave those open expectations. So when you say things like, "I'm going to try to squeeze that in," knowing very well that you don't have a ton of bandwidth to do things, you're setting a false expectation for folks, right? That's it. And so you have to be open, you have to be candid, and you have to be direct. And if you don't have time, you say things like, "I will be able to get to this," name a date, name a time, name a week, name a quarter. Like, you start being definitive with your answers to folks.
Yeah, and I fall into this trap occasionally, right? Because I want to help, right? But then you don't put bounds on it. So the next thing you know, you're checking your Slack at 8:00 at night, responding to stuff when, you know what, you probably should have said, "No, I'll get to it in the morning," and do it in the morning, right? And that's what this article is talking about, like how to set those expectations, clearly communicate that without sounding like a jerk. But it's more about just being able to clearly communicate that and setting proper expectations.
Right. Now let's align that to something a little bit, right? Because that may be an individual action item that you need to take care of for somebody.
Yep.
Now let's align that to something a little bit more important in the human side. Someone comes to you and says, "I really want to talk about my professional development, and I want to move into a higher level position within the organization." And you start saying to them, "That sounds great. We should talk about that." And then a week later, "That sounds great. We should talk about that." 2 months goes by. "That sounds great." And you keep pushing people out and out and out instead of saying, "Let's, on this date, this time, make a plan and make a roadmap for you and start talking about milestones to get you to where you need to be." And then you actually have a meeting and you talk about it and you set milestones and you execute against the milestones. Big difference. Now you're leading people on.
Right.
And what that does is it breeds mistrust. You don't ever want that.
Right.
Because you're just teasing people along.
Yep. And that creates bad culture and poor leadership and all the other things that go
100%.
wrong with that. Yeah.
100%. You know, and then at the end, it has a bunch of phrases that you can use instead of the ones that are a little bit vague and gray and, you know, not definitive. And just, you know, take a look at some of those responses that you can use that are more straightforward. It's more powerful. It'll build trust, and it really sets a line in the sand.
I'm going to set a line in the sand right now. It's time to wrap up the show. Jason, thank you, as always, for joining me today. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.